Hello there again. Ian Cathcart here. Glad you could be here. Slightly different tack this morning. One of the things which maybe I shouldn't admit because I'm not sure it's necessarily a good thing. I've been really curious to see the kind of what I would call celebrities and famous people who have sadly passed away from the coronavirus. Um, I don't know why it should affect me. There's a guy, a comedian, Tim Brooke Taylor. For people of a certain age, he was one of a trio who was in a thing called the Goodies in the 70s and 80s. And when I say he was just a comedian, he was a comedian. But the fact that he died of the coronavirus just seemed it's part of this thing where it's other people who die of the coronavirus, just normal people, but not famous people. Anyway, the point was, it was there's another individual who maybe you wouldn't necessarily think of him as being famous. He was certainly in the last 20 to 30 years, very, very powerful figure. There's a guy called John Houghton, Sir John Houghton. Um, he was born in Wales, and he ended up being he went to Oxford, became an atmospheric physicist, and he led the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and was basically instrumental in bringing out three reports, um, three reports 1990, 95, and then 2001. And the fact that human beings are the main cause of climate change was proven to be a fact. He was one of the ones who got the Nobel Prize in 2007 for his work on climate change. He got various things. He elected Fellow of the Royal Society, the world's oldest continuous scientific society. He was knighted by Queen Elizabeth in 1991, won the Royal Astronomical Society's Gold Medal in 1995, got the Japan Prize in 2006. He went to Oxford at 16. His dad was a history teacher, his mum was a maths teacher, and he was just a smart guy from the very beginning. But that's not why, basically on the 15th of April, he passed away as a consequence of the coronavirus. He was 88, and the last few years of his life, despite the fact that as somebody who was very much known for his intellect and intellectual powers to analyse and apply what he was learning from the scientific data, the difficulty was in his latter years. He suffered from dementia. A lot of his ability to analyse, a lot of his intellect was lost, and his memories were lost to this horrible, horrible disease. The thing is, the sadness of all of that is not why I'm referring to him. From the outset, not just in some kind of memoir after the event, right in the middle of the situation when he was trying to kind of promote the findings of his scientific research, he was very clear about why he didn't. The thing that set him apart was it wasn't just a case of here are the facts, the application and what it would mean for society, and his personal motivation for putting this over and making it such an issue for politicians. That was what set him apart. Listen to this. He expressed a deep concern of how grave and imminent the danger of climate crisis would be because it would affect tens of millions of people in developing nations. I quote, "As a Christian, I feel I have a responsibility to love our neighbours. And that doesn't just mean our neighbours next door. It means our poor neighbours in the poorer parts of the world. One of the things that's very, very clear was that he doesn't just do the science. He lived the application and implications of the science. And it's because it was such a contentious issue. In America, if you believe in global warming and climate change, it means you've been duped by a Chinese hoax to do down the American economy, and basically you're not somebody who's going to defend, you're not being patriotically American. In other words, to try and convince Americans of the reality of climate change is something akin to Christian conversion itself. And that's why he was so significant. He didn't just have a complete and absolute command of the information. His faith meant he could build bridges to the Christian community in America in a way that basically nobody else could. Here's just a lovely quote. I think it's a very exciting thing to put scientific knowledge alongside religious beliefs. The biggest thing that can ever happen to anybody is to get a relationship with the one who created the universe. In the great scientific awakening of 300 years ago, with people like Sir Isaac Newton, Robert Boyle, and Sir Christopher Wren, and others who used to meet and talk about science in that great time, they were nearly all Christians. Why were they doing science? They were doing their science to explore what God had done. They said it quite openly. We're doing this for the glory of God. If you want to find out more about him, he wrote a memoir, an autobiography called In the Eye of the Storm, appropriately enough, which tells not only the kind of difficulties at a scientific level of actually working out what was happening, but having worked out what's happening atmospherically with the data, he then had to be in a different storm of actually meeting and contending with those who, it would appear, with very negative motives, were trying to destroy his message. The thing is nowadays that balance, that co-joining of science and faith is relatively rare, and I just think it's significant that he did it so well. Despite his worldly success, Horton said the most important choice he ever made was to accept Jesus as his Saviour and Lord. He believed that rather than being in conflict, his faith in Jesus and love of science belonged together. He said this in a 2010 speech. Listen to some scientists these days and they'll tell you that God doesn't exist and science is the only story. That, of course, is not true. Where do the laws of nature come from? What do we do when we do science? We discover what's there. We haven't invented it. Scientists aren't that clever. Scientists aren't the creators. Horton spent much of his time calling on Christians to support action based on climate change, based on climate science, saying the church should be seizing the opportunity because the world is in desperate need of leadership. It's a global thing. It involves all countries and all peoples. It is ironic it would be the coronavirus that kills this man, given the fact that this is also a global thing and involves all countries and all peoples. He sought to make known a crisis of a different kind. And he did so not despite his scientific knowledge, but because his scientific knowledge and his faith went together. Sadly, because of the dementia, we had effectively lost him as a contributor to this debate quite some time ago. For him personally, I think his passing will be a blessing. But we need to recognise the truth that he spoke out, not only in terms of faith, but also in recognising the coronavirus is not the only crisis that this planet has to deal with. The coronavirus is but an appetizer of what will be our lot if we do not directly and quite vociferously go after the causes of climate change in the way in which we're going after the causes of the coronavirus. If we don't take mitigating action in the way that we are against coronavirus, if we don't do that against the changes in climate, then sadly, lockdown will be something that will be happening a lot more. In other words, we need to recognise, one, a very, very powerful speaker who sadly has been taken. For him, a good thing. He's gone home. For the rest of us, we need to hear his message and recognise the difficulties that we are directly addressing with this virus. There are other things in our culture that we need to address with equal force and vigour. Go with God, because I know God goes with you. See you sometime soon. Bye-bye.